Right, so a quick look at the Ironman HUD that I wanted to give a go. I really like the effect, and I had an idea in my head of how this was going to be created. So I basically just went for it. The original Ironman footage here that I'm just going to show is showing all the various scenes here of him wearing all the hood and all the effects and everything that's going on. So there's shots obviously here of him looking out, and then also shots of us looking in. I mean, realistically, we wouldn't get that kind of shot because the perception of depth that we have there in the shot is a lot bigger than what you'd actually get in the with the visor kind of looking outwards. But all these kind of things popping in and out, and the effect of him actually wearing the helmet and all the effects traveling around him is what I was hoping to achieve essentially. This video goes on for a long time, nearly 13 minutes there. But a lot of it just gives the general idea of how was this effect achieved essentially. So this is the orphanage who done the effects for the visor, and this was their original test shots just to see how they had planned on setting up the shot themselves. So green screen background, they've got a few points there in the background as well as some kind of tracking information. These little sticks here, that's probably what they've used to try and track something. And again, yeah, just things to look at to see this is how we can kind of pan the camera left and right and still make it look like he's in quite an enclosed environment. So that's just them just going through their ideas, how do I think this could actually work, and how can we make this environment look like they're wearing a visor. And it's quite good to see them go through the various iterations, and he has a full 360 wraparound. Why you need something behind your head, I don't know, but the effect there is quite cool. I mean, the whole thing obviously is a fantasy anyway. So the main areas of the actual shot of this head-up display. Well, the original footage, obviously of me, going to be looking around. The lighting, how am I going to light my face to make it look like these things are actually reflecting on me. 2D elements, so I'm going to need something to actually animate. 3D elements, there was things there where there was rotating images actually of the suit, etc. The animation, obviously, how am I going to time the actual suit with the images moving around. And the depth of field stuff, so things that are closer to his face and things that are further away, with that kind of focus. Again, if you had the suit on, obviously you wouldn't see things in the distance that were blurred, or I presume you wouldn't. So it's a bit of a visual effect for the depth of field stuff. Setting stuff up, I had a green screen, and then a light to actually illuminate the green screen, and then me in front of it, and then a red and a blue light off to the side. So this is a top-down view of me essentially, with the green screen behind me and the two lights pointing on either side, and then a camera pointing directly at my face there down at the bottom. Did I need the green screen? Well, I thought I did, because I need to kind of get rid of the background. But when I started doing this, then no, I didn't, because obviously the edges of my face were going to be darkened anyway. So anything, it was kind of handy to pick up an alpha channel potentially, but I didn't really need it. Seeing the white light so close to me, essentially because I needed to hide the light behind my head. So in order to get a bigger illumination, the closer the light is to the green screen, the more of a hotspot you start to get. So I wanted this light as far away from the green screen as I could, and that kind of fixed my head quite still, so I could kind of just rotate it left and right and not really start to move around too much. That I didn't want to do anyway, because it would look a bit strange with the being inside a helmet. So the shooting stuff, a nice flat colour on the image, so I just shot myself against the background there, and the light is literally kind of there behind my head, so you just can't see it. And it was done with a flat log profile, just for the stuff to get the dynamic range. Went in there, a bit more kind of contrast on the image, just to kind of get the black and white levels, so we've got a bit more of a contrasty image now. A really strong colour correct. This thing back here obviously was quite strong, and it's creating a bit of a halo around my head, but because I knew I was going to end up chopping this out, then the halo effect wasn't wasn't that important. And rotoring out the background to give me this final look around my head, a bit like Holly, I guess, from Red Dwarf. There was a problem to this though, and I discovered after I'd done it, I thought actually that's not quite right. Mainly because I'd used the red and blue light, and there was no way, if I wanted to do a different HUD, so I wanted to do maybe an all white head-up display, there wouldn't be any way that I could easily alter these colours. So I changed the layout a bit. I went back to the green screen stuff on a day or two later, and then set up two white lights on the camera instead. So I was being evenly lit from both sides. My garage setup there, so quite simple. I'm hoping you guys with a few lights and obviously the space to do it. I've got a nice big double garage, and a seat, a couple of lights, and lights shining up against the green screen, and then just a smaller light, well, a bigger light but not as powerful, shining down on me, and then just the camera itself. So the camera was looking at me, and I've just got a VDU, a viewfinder here, so I can see what I'm doing. I'm upside down, but that didn't matter as long as I could see I was actually on the screen correctly. So that was my simple setup: 3 lights, or 4 lights, and a camera and a stand basically, and that was it. How much detail could it pick up? So looking at the tracking information, so once I got the shot in general and brought it into Nuke, I used the camera tracker. So the default settings there are pretty small. It's tracking 12 images, or tracking 150, and the detection threshold there is quite high, and it's looking for a file at least 3 frames long. So I had a good play around with this, and basically I read a file on Facebook saying you can actually throw an awful lot of files at it. You'll end up dumping a lot, but hopefully you'll end up keeping a lot as well, essentially. So it's tracking points across the whole frame. No, I didn't need my shirt track, so all I was interested in was my head. So I created a mask, and I just kind of masked out the bits of the image I actually wanted to know about. So if you've got 500 points to track, you may as well try and track all 500 points within your face, and then not bother about the creases except in the background. And it just and then increased the number of the things I was looking for. So it was 150 when it started. I think it went up a lot higher than that. I was probably looking in the thousands. I was trying to track at this point, maybe 5,000 points I was looking at, and then play with the detection and separation stuff, and you can eventually kind of come up with a nice selection of points here that would track quite nicely. It says that a lot of the points will be rejected, but it still means you'll end up with a lot more at the end of the track. The important thing is to give a good idea as to how long the lens is for the lens distortion stuff, and a very important part of it that I discovered is making sure the film back size is correct. So I went and found out the size of the sensor on my Blackmagic camera, and then typed those units in, so I knew exactly kind of how much of the image was being captured. And finally there, basically going through all the tracking and updating it and removing points that weren't tracking very well to get it under 1 essentially. And once it's under 1, it's a good indication that you've got a fairly good track at this point. So I created the scene, the camera, and the scene in the point cloud, and export the whole thing, and basically seeing what it done. So this was what the eventual cloud produced, and I was quite impressed basically by just how much of my face, how much that looked like me at the end of it. I was quite impressed by kind of just the colours there, etc., and what it had done. It's done a really good job of being able to capture a 3D representation of my face. So the thing that makes this approach a bit strange, obviously in the original footage, the camera was fixed, and the head was moving, and kind of you can see Robert Downey Jr. moving around a bit, and that's what they're tracking with the effects on the screen. But for this though, kind of I'm in a fixed place, and with me turning left and right, it's the camera that's now moving. So my head is now fixed in one place, and to get the left and right of me moving my head around and the up and down, this is actually done with the camera moving up and down and not me. And this was a much easier way of trying to track the various elements from the head-up display. So how did I create this? I got the export data and then I made the camera data. Did I need some camera geo? Not really. Well, not for the export anyway. Create some geometry in Maya and rendered out the frames. So I wanted to see basically I could take all of these points in space, bring them all into Maya, and then try and animate it that way. But I found it much easier to just stay within Nuke essentially. The Maya was just the test. What's going to be better? Is it going to be better using like Arnold and that kind of stuff, or is it better just keeping within Nuke? And for this, Nuke was so much easier to work in. Create some textures and animate them in a script. So just a test between the two bits of software, and like I said, kind of Nuke was definitely the winner at this point. So the FBX file in Maya produced this cloud image of all these locators, and the camera worked fine. So the data did actually work. It was great. And then I started making some geometry, so the various things that the elements were going to appear on. And then it was the colored lighting stuff. How was I going to make the colored lighting? I was going to need to generate obviously some kind of 3D representation of my head, and then try and light that with a couple of lights within Maya. And to get that, Maya doesn't do that kind of meshing essentially. So I need to go and look at something that will actually generate geometry from essentially cloud data, which was some photogrammetry software. And I decided essentially that I didn't want to learn another bit of software. Learning Nuke was enough. So I dropped it on that premise essentially, where it was going to take too much time to try and figure out how to get a nice output from Maya and all this cloud data. So all within Nuke. After the camera track, bring my footage back in, and you can use the point cloud generator to generate a mesh. And I think I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. It says something like Poisson mesh or something like that, where it generates basically a mesh based on the cloud data. And once you've got that mesh, you can then project the original footage back onto it. And you can see there, it's given a really kind of nice overall image of me and the cloud data of the original footage essentially. Obviously, if you look at it from not the original camera angle, you get this horrible image because it's just a projection, and that you can project through, and the bit that you can't see with the camera obviously just streaks straight past. But it's fine as long as you're looking at it from the right angle. You don't get to see any of this horribleness. However, the plan was to add a couple of lights actually from Nuke and light the images from Nuke. But the mesh that it creates isn't that useful in terms of being able to use it just straight away. There's far too much distortion here and noise within the image that would affect the lighting coming from Nuke. So you can see there's the image of me again being projected, when now it's being lit by some actual lights within Nuke and not the original footage from not the original lighting from the footage. So you can see all the various bumps there that we can see in this left hand image starting to appear quite strongly, especially down around the neck on top of my head, and that wasn't very flattering. So without a lot of time being able to clean this up and smooth it all out, again I realised I wasn't going to be able to use any 3D lighting within this. So this is the original Robert Downey Jr. footage of just kind of him doing the shot, and there's they're obviously lighting him with outside stuff as well, which is quite nicely timed. They've got the blue parts there. The light was quite nice, and as they're changing this the blue bit there and the white, and obviously these tracking points again, and you see how they've used this blue footage etc. within the final shot of what's going on. So for me, I decided to basically create a bunch of layers and then add these layers to the generated mesh essentially. So then by doing that, going through and just adding various masks, and I could use these masks to generate the colour that I wanted to for either side of my face. So you can see I've brought the original footage in, I've created an alpha basically around my face, and the blur there is because the fall off from the roto node is quite harsh, and blur just works a lot smoother essentially. And then I've added a couple of masks for red and blue, and then I've used them to do a colour correction on certain parts of the face. So there's the mask of my face, and that was animated over time as I turned my head. And then the blur there to give a much nicer edge than what the original Roto Fall Off had. Here I am just splitting up the image, so once I've got this piece of footage here, I can then do a calculation on the alpha channel. So here I'll get a multiplication, so I'll just get the alpha channel lit where it's the side of my head, and then obviously the bit where there's an overlap to do the blue side, and very similar again with the red side as well. And as I turn my head, all I've been doing is just animating the points along the spline here to make the thing move from left to right and up and down, etc. And the nice thing about this was, once I've kind of got this mask working, I could then change to whatever colour I wanted to, and you could get the effect of any kind of setup you wanted at this point, which is great. Finally, I've done just some simple images in Photoshop. So yeah, very cheap and nasty, but as I said, this was just basically a test to see if I could actually do the work, and nothing spectacular. So some images there, and some other bits and bobs here, just buttons and kind of things within all the various layers, and quite a few layers here. So this is the important part, to know that when you create this image, that every single separate image here needed to be on a separate layer, and saved that was a PSD file as well. So one of the nice things about Nuke is that you can load in PSD files. So when you bring it in, you can basically have the rings PSD there, and you have a breakout layers option. So when you brought that in, if you hit breakout layers, it goes to the PSD file, and all of those layers that you've had in Photoshop, it then puts into separate layers, which is great, and you basically get them along like this, which is really nice. At this point, it's as a close-up there, it shuffles them out and it crops them, and then it merges them all back together again. So the final output is essentially the PSD file with all the channels and layers turned on. But these were RGB images, and I needed alpha channels, so I had to convert them. So I got a color here of the effect that I wanted, and then I've just gone along with that effect, and every single layer with this different ring or effect, I've just added the alpha channel onto this constant. So I've ended up with however many layers I had with a reddish channel, and each channel having its own new alpha, because I copied the new alpha onto the actual reference itself. So yeah, I wasn't going to start creating loads and loads of constants and then loads of bits and bobs. Just having the one single constant was absolutely fine, and basically just copy the alpha channel of each layer onto a new version of that constant, and then pre-multiplying them all again to get the final image back as a single thing I could play with, and the glow obviously there for obvious reasons. It says that I've used an alpha mix, so all of these copies are linked together. So if I change the value of one of these alphas in terms of the intensity of the opacity, then it would work for all of them. So it was quite nice to be able just to change one, and they all work with that. As a warning there, I've basically said don't use decal sheets if you can help it, because I found it very difficult to take a section of this image and then try and get it in the right place where I can actually play with it and rotate it. So much better if you want to do edges and bits and bobs, then actually create your image that does run from top left to bottom right, and just use that as a separate image, rather than try and shuffle around with scales and translations and all that kind of stuff. It was a bit of a nightmare trying to move this, because the pivot point was down here, and then when you'd scale it, you had to bring it back in again. It was just more trouble than what it was worth, essentially. Eventually, we have the final shot. So all the various layers from Photoshop, and then we've gone in and we've added these all together again, and each one now has its own card, and then we've got the combination here of mixing them all back together again into one single piece. So we've got the merge geometry there, so each layer has its own card, so we can do the depth sort of it, and then we've got two transform geo nodes. The important bit there is that it's now geometry, because we're using cards, so it's not just a transform node, it's a transform geo node now. The reason why I had two, I didn't need to, but this was more of an afterthought after I'd done it, is that I put the cards in the right place and then transformed them and realised that I'd put the pivot point in the wrong place. So I had to go back and kind of recreate a new pivot point essentially. So I should really just have one there. So you can see here that I put all the cards in the right place in relation to the head here, and then I grouped them all together. So all the pivot points here of the cards are fine, and then I grouped them all together so they were here at 0, 0, 0. But in order to get these points to rotate around, obviously I didn't want them to rotate around here. I wanted them to rotate around the head, so they could rotate with the head as I moved the head. So that's what the second pivot point was for. The first pivot point kind of grouped them here, and then the second pivot point regrouped them again back to the middle of my head. And they're all placed on cards with their own alpha channels. You can see here the effects start to take shape, where I've taken that original Photoshop image and then I've scanned all the layers out, so each one of these rings is a card and what was a layer in Photoshop. And I wanted to basically see some 3D geometry as well, so I was going to model something in Maya, and then because this was really just a test to prove that I could do it, I just thought, no, I'm not going to spend any time doing something that complicated. I'll just use a few things from Nuke itself. So you can generate a sphere in Nuke quite easily, and then I slapped on an alpha channel of a globe image that I found some on the internet, and the same thing for the rings around the outside. I just used a couple of cards and I drew these discs in Photoshop with all the various little tabs on it, and then just put them in there as well. I just kind of animate the whole thing rotating essentially. So each individual card there it says there kind of they're all individually animated for scale. So the cards would grow and kind of come out and find their own place within the depth part of the image. So, and the sphere just basically span its own axis. So it's just kind of down there, just off the center line. And the whole thing was grouped as I looked around. So as I kind of looked from left and right, obviously my head isn't moving, so I couldn't attach them to the head. They were all animated by themselves because it was the camera that was moving and not my head. So the reason for animating the cards was to give the cards and my head a bit of lag. So as I turn my head, the kind of images follow a few frames afterwards. And I ended up with a fairly complicated version here of things being offset and shuffling around and scaling, etc. Just using the graph editor equivalent within Nuke. So once all the geometry was in and all scaled out, just a few more things left to go. So there's all the depth there from the camera. Bring my face back in. So we found the image there. And a few more things left once the final image was back in again. Scanline renderer to get it all working at the end. And the Scanline renderer has an awful lot of tabs on it. So you've got the RGB and the alpha, but also a bunch of other things in here as well. And one of the nice things it does is motion vector information. So previous frame, current frame, how much is moved. Useful. Why? Well, obviously it can give you motion blur. So you haven't got to render the motion blur within something like Maya. You can do it as a post process within Nuke, and it gave a really nice kind of effect. Certainly a lot better than what I thought it was going to be. So really quite nice there with the vector information. It has depth information as well. Again, kind of why is this useful? Because we can create a depth of field, so we can create out of focus stuff and FOV and that things. So from there to there, so the focus point very much being on my face, and then as you get further away from the focal point, which is my face, then you get more and more blur as you get further and further away from the focal point. So the final image here is of me. I don't know whether this will play or not. No, it's not, so I will open the image and I'll show you the final shot. So this was all within Nuke. There's no 3D in here at all. Now the image there of my face is the 3D image that was generated from the Poisson mesh, whatever it is. and the camera's moving around to create all the various bits, and from the camera I'm projecting the original footage onto this mesh, and then we can see the 3D geometry moving around with a slight bit of lag, and all the scaling going up and all the rotations etc. of all these pieces is all happening basically within Nuke and animated and all the timing stuff. So anything more I could do after that? Obviously, kind of now that I know that those 20 or so planes were working, you can now go up and really start to pile the planes on and actually get them moving around in front of the screen and shuffling backwards and forwards, and starting to look a lot more like the footage from Iron Man. Reflections in the eyes would be quite nice. So if I could go in there and actually create a mask around the eyes and start putting some kind of feeling, it wouldn't have to be super accurate because the eyes are moving that fast, but putting something like that actually onto the footage would be quite cool. Tracking the eye would be nice. If I could do some kind of motion on the eye, so as you look around, some kind of like floating cursor would be quite nice. And video frames on a card. I think a few times he phones Pepper, I think, and other bits and bobs, and you see the video footage over in the corner as he's talking to her, so that would be quite nice as well. And anything else that could come up with at that point. Right, so that was the end of that. I can go back to the webcam. So hopefully those two things were useful to you. The Rogue One stuff, obviously very much professional way of looking at a shot, and then the stuff that I've done for the Iron Man thing there, again, just a way of breaking down how they've done this shot, breaking it down, and just basically seeing with working out, and I think I was quite successful at being able to replicate what they've done actually in the film. So again, I hope that was useful to you. I'll post the slides up on the Blackboard site at some point, and yep, sorry I can't be there, but I am in another lesson. Alright, thanks very much now, take care, bye.